The research vessel Horizon's Edge drifted silently through the void of space, its hull gleaming under the distant light of foreign stars. Inside the command center, Captain Jake Morrison stood before the main viewing screen, watching as an alien ship approached their position. The vessel was unlike anything humanity had ever seen before, its crystalline surface reflecting light in patterns that seemed to shift and dance with each passing moment. Dr. Lisa Martinez adjusted her communication equipment one final time, her hands trembling slightly with excitement and nervousness. Today marked the first peaceful contact between humanity and an alien species, and she had been chosen to lead the scientific team responsible for this historic moment. The weight of representing all of humanity pressed heavily on her shoulders. But she had trained for this moment her entire career. The alien ship, elegant and graceful in its movements, came to a stop just a few hundred meters from the horizon's edge. Its design suggested a civilization far more advanced than humanity, with technology that seemed to bend the very laws of physics. The hull appeared to be made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed with inner light, creating patterns that were both beautiful and alien. Captain Morrison activated the ship's communication system and spoke clearly into the transmitter. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Horizon's Edge. We welcome you in peace and friendship." His voice carried the hopes and fears of an entire species, knowing that this first interaction would set the tone for all future relations. Between the two civilizations, the response came quickly, transmitted directly into their communication systems through technology that human scientists could barely comprehend. The alien voice was melodic yet cold, speaking in perfect English through what must have been some form of universal translator. "I am Ambassador Zethkala of the Kethaneri Empire. We have observed your species and have come to evaluate your potential value to our civilization." The words sent a chill through the human crew. The tone was not one of greeting between equals, but rather that of a superior being addressing lesser creatures. Dr. Martinez exchanged worried glances with Captain Morrison. But they had prepared for the possibility that first contact might not go exactly as hoped. Within minutes, the alien ship extended a docking tube that attached itself to the horizon's edge, with technology that seemed to flow like liquid metal. The airlock cycled, and the first aliens to set foot on a human vessel stepped aboard. Ambassador Zethkala was tall and imposing, standing nearly 8 feet in height with skin that appeared to be made of living crystal. The light from the ship's corridors reflected off her surface, creating rainbow patterns that shifted with every movement. Behind the ambassador came Dr. Vithanara, the Kethaneri's lead scientist, along with several other alien officials. They moved with fluid grace, their crystalline forms seeming to glide rather than walk. Each alien carried themselves with an air of superiority that made the human crew feel small and primitive in comparison. Captain Morrison stepped forward and extended his hand in the traditional human greeting. "Welcome aboard the Horizon's Edge. We are honored by your presence." His gesture was met with what could only be described as amusement from the aliens. They looked at his extended hand as if it were some curious custom of a primitive species. "Ambassador," Zethkala spoke without accepting the handshake. "Your customs are quaint, Captain Morrison. We have studied your species extensively and find your social behaviors to be quite elementary." Her words cut through the air like a blade, making it clear that the Kethaneri considered themselves vastly superior to humanity. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, hoping to redirect the conversation toward more positive ground. "We have prepared a cultural exchange program. We would be happy to share our knowledge, art, and technology with your people, and we hope you might do the same with us." Her voice carried genuine enthusiasm for the opportunity to learn from an advanced alien civilization. Dr. Vithanara examined the human scientist with clinical detachment, as if she were studying an interesting but inferior specimen. "Your offer is appreciated, but we doubt your primitive technology would be of any value to our civilization. However, we are willing to observe your customs for research purposes." The dismissive tone made it clear that the Kethaneri viewed humans as subjects to be studied rather than equals to be respected. The tour of the ship began with the aliens, examining human technology with barely concealed amusement. When communications, Officer Amy Rodriguez demonstrated the ship's computer systems. The aliens laughed openly at what they considered crude and outdated technology. Their own devices seemed to respond to thought alone, making human interfaces appear clumsy and inefficient. Lieutenant Commander Kate Sullivan, the ship's chief medical officer, led the aliens through the medical bay. She explained human medical procedures with professional pride, describing how they treated injuries and diseases. The aliens listened with the patience of adults humoring children, occasionally exchanging glances that suggested they found human medicine to be barbarically primitive. When Dr. Vithanara examined the medical equipment, she commented loudly to her colleagues. Their understanding of biological systems is remarkably limited. They still use physical tools to perform procedures that we accomplish with thought-directed energy manipulation. Her words were clearly intended to be heard by the human crew, adding insult to what was already a humiliating experience. As the tour continued, Amy Rodriguez rolled up her sleeve to adjust a control panel, revealing a small tattoo on her wrist. It was a simple design, a compass rose with her grandmother's initials, but it immediately caught the attention of the aliens. They stared at the marking with expressions of disgust and confusion. Ambassador Zethkala pointed at the tattoo with one of her crystalline fingers. "What is that marking on your flesh?" Her voice carried a mixture of revulsion and curiosity, as if she had discovered something particularly distasteful. Amy looked down at her tattoo, confused by the strong reaction. "It's just a tattoo. A way to remember my grandmother who taught me to navigate by the stars." She spoke with pride, but her words only seemed to increase the aliens' amusement. Dr. Vithanara moved closer to examine the tattoo more carefully. "Primitive flesh marking of lesser beings. Your species defaces its own bodies with crude pigments. This confirms our assessment of your civilization's developmental level." Her clinical tone made the insult even more cutting. The other aliens began to laugh, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but the context made it anything but pleasant. They spoke among themselves in their own language, clearly discussing the humans as if they were not present. The universal translator picked up fragments of their conversation, revealing comments about human weakness, primitive customs, and biological limitations. Captain Morrison felt his anger rising but forced himself to remain diplomatic. In our culture, tattoos often represent important memories, achievements, or beliefs. They are a form of artistic expression and personal meaning. He tried to explain, but his words fell on deaf ears. Ambassador Zethkala waved dismissively. "Your attempts to justify primitive behavior are unnecessary. We have seen enough to complete our initial assessment." She turned to address the entire human crew with an air of condescending authority. "The Kethanari Empire has decided to offer your species a generous opportunity." The aliens gathered in the center of the room, their crystalline forms creating a circle of reflected light. Ambassador Zethkala continued speaking, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "We will provide protection for your species in exchange for your service. You will work in our expanding empire, performing tasks suited to your limited capabilities. In return, we will ensure your survival and basic needs are met." Dr. Martinez stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her diplomatic caution. "What kind of service are you referring to? We would need to understand the terms of any agreement before our leaders could consider it." Her questions were reasonable, but the alien seemed annoyed by her persistence. Dr. Vithanara answered with clinical precision. "Your species would serve as a labor force for construction projects, resource extraction, and basic maintenance tasks. Your biological limitations make you unsuitable for more complex responsibilities, but you could be useful for simple physical labor." The description made it clear that the Kethanari viewed humans as nothing more than potential slaves. The silence that followed was deafening. The human crew exchanged glances filled with shock and anger. This was not the first contact scenario they had hoped for or prepared for. Instead of meeting equals interested in friendship and mutual benefit, they had encountered a species that saw them as inferior beings suitable only for exploitation. Captain Morrison squared his shoulders and spoke with quiet dignity. "We appreciate your offer, but humanity values its independence and freedom. We must respectfully decline your proposal." His words carried the weight of speaking for all of humanity, knowing that this moment would determine the future relationship between the two species. Ambassador Zethkala's expression showed no surprise at the rejection. "Your refusal is noted and expected. Primitive species often resist the guidance of their superiors until they understand the consequences." 3 months had passed since the first contact with the Kethaneri, and Earth's government had spent every day preparing for what many believed was inevitable. The aliens had made their intentions clear during that initial meeting, and humanity was not naive enough to believe that rejection would be the end of the matter. Military installations across the globe worked around the clock to prepare defenses, while scientists scrambled to understand the alien technology they had observed. Admiral Patrick Hayes stood in the command center of the space station Aurora, watching the long-range sensors with growing concern. The readings showed something massive approaching from the edge of the solar system, moving at speeds that human technology could barely track. The signature was unmistakably Kethaneri, but the size of the approaching fleet suggested this was no diplomatic mission. The communication array crackled to life, and the familiar voice of Captain Jake Morrison filled the command center. "Admiral Hayes, the Horizon's Edge is detecting multiple alien vessels approaching Earth. The fleet appears to be at least 50 ships strong, with several massive vessels that dwarf anything we encountered during first contact." His voice carried the weight of a man who had seen this day coming but had hoped to be wrong. "Admiral." Hayes activated the fleet-wide communication system, his voice reaching every human vessel in the solar system. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. We are about to face the greatest threat in human history. The Kethaneri have returned in force, and their intentions are clearly hostile. Every man and woman in this fleet carries the hopes and dreams of our entire species. We will not go quietly into the night." The human fleet had been assembled from every available vessel, including military ships, converted cargo haulers, and even some civilian craft that had been hastily armed. Captain Lisa Chun commanded the destroyer Valiant, while Captain Danny Foster led a squadron of fighters from the carrier Defiant. The entire force numbered barely 200 ships, facing an alien fleet that appeared to be far superior in both numbers and technology. Dr. Vithanara stood on the bridge of the Kethaneri flagship, studying the approaching human fleet with clinical interest. The primitive vessels moved in formation patterns that she found quaint and ineffective, their crude propulsion systems leaving visible trails in space. She had requested permission to capture specimens during the coming battle, particularly interested in studying human responses to mortal danger. Admiral Kethvos, the military commander of the Kethaneri fleet, addressed his subordinates with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "The human infestation will be cleansed from this system within the day. Their primitive technology poses no threat to our superior vessels. We will demonstrate to the galaxy what happens to species that reject the generous guidance of the Kethaneri Empire." The alien fleet moved with perfect coordination, their crystalline ships reflecting the light of Earth's sun in patterns that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Each vessel was a work of art, flowing curves and elegant lines that spoke of a civilization that had mastered the union of form and function. Their weapon systems charged with energy that made space itself seem to shimmer and bend. Kate Sullivan stood in the medical bay of the Horizon's Edge, preparing emergency supplies for the wounded she knew would soon fill her facility. The past 3 months had been spent studying every scrap of information they had gathered about Kethaneri technology, hoping to find weaknesses or advantages that might help human forces. The results had been discouraging, but she refused to give up hope. The first shots of the battle were fired by the Kethaneri, beams of crystalline energy that tore through the hull of the human cruiser Marathon like it was made of paper. The explosion lit up the void of space, and Admiral Hayes watched in horror as 300 human lives were snuffed out in an instant. The alien weapons were even more devastating than their initial assessments had suggested. Captain Danny Foster led his fighter squadron in a desperate attack run against the nearest Kethenary vessel, hoping that smaller, faster ships might be able to find gaps in their defenses. The fighters danced through space, their pilots pushing their machines to the absolute limit as they tried to avoid the alien weapon systems. Several fighters exploded in bright flashes of light, their pilots dying heroes in humanity's darkest. Our Dr. Vithanara recorded every moment of the battle, her instruments measuring human response times, tactical decisions, and biological stress indicators. She found their desperate courage to be an interesting phenomenon, noting how humans continued to fight even when facing certain death. This behavior pattern was unlike anything in Kethenary culture, where logical beings would surrender when defeat became inevitable. The human fleet fought with everything they had, but the technological gap was simply too great to overcome. Ship after ship fell to the alien weapons, their crews dying in the cold vacuum of space. Admiral Hayes watched his fleet being systematically destroyed, but he refused to order a retreat. Earth needed time to prepare its final defenses, and every minute the fleet could buy might mean the difference between survival and extinction. Captain Lisa Chun's destroyer Valiant managed to score a hit on one of the smaller Kethenary vessels, but the damage was minimal. The alien ship's shields absorbed most of the impact, and its crystalline hull showed only minor scoring where human weapons had struck. The disparity in defensive capabilities was as dramatic as the difference in offensive power. The USS Defiant, one of humanity's most advanced carriers, found itself surrounded by Kethenary ships. Captain Morrison ordered all available fighters to launch, hoping to create enough confusion to allow some of his people to escape. The hangar bays erupted in activity as pilots rushed to their machines, knowing that this might be their final flight. Kate Sullivan felt the ship shake as alien weapons struck the Defiant's hull. The medical bay's lights flickered, and she could hear the groaning of stressed metal as the ship's structure began to fail. Emergency alerts sounded throughout the vessel, and she knew that her time as a healer was about to become a fight for survival. The Kethenary weapons created wounds unlike anything human medicine had encountered before. The crystalline energy seemed to disrupt cellular structure at the molecular level, causing injuries that were both horrific and difficult to treat. Kate worked frantically to save as many lives as possible, but the alien technology was proving as deadly to the wounded as it was to the ships themselves. Admiral Kethvos observed the battle with satisfaction, noting how quickly human resistance was crumbling. Their primitive weapons were barely capable of scratching Kethenary armor, while each shot from his fleet destroyed or crippled an enemy vessel. The outcome had never been in doubt, but the ease of victory was still gratifying. Dr. Vithanara made a request through the command structure, asking permission to capture some human specimens before they were all destroyed. She was particularly interested in their medical officer, the female who had shown such composure during the first contact. Studying human biology under stress conditions would provide valuable data for future encounters with primitive species. The USS Defiant's shields finally failed under the concentrated fire of 3 Kethenary cruisers. The ship's hull began to crack and buckle, atmosphere rushing out through the growing breaches. Captain Morrison ordered all hands to abandon ship, but the evacuation pods were being targeted by alien fighters before they could reach safety. Kate Sullivan found herself in charge of a group of wounded crew members who were unable to reach the evacuation pods. The ship's corridors were filled with smoke and the sound of buckling metal, and she knew that they had only minutes before the vessel's final destruction. She made a decision that would change everything, leading her group toward the shuttle bay in a desperate attempt to save their lives. The shuttle bay was in chaos, with damaged fighters and debris scattered across the deck. Kate managed to get her group aboard one of the few remaining shuttles, but the launch sequence was interrupted by the arrival of Kethenary boarding parties. The aliens moved through the ship with fluid grace, their crystalline forms seemingly immune to the smoke and radiation that was killing the human crew. Dr. Vithanara accompanied the boarding party, her scientific instruments scanning for suitable specimens. She found Kate Sullivan attempting to evacuate wounded crew members, and immediately recognized her as the medical officer from the first contact. The human female showed remarkable composure despite the desperate situation, and Dr. Vethanara decided that she would make an excellent subject for study. The capture was swift and efficient, with Kethanari soldiers using energy weapons to stun Kate and several other crew members. Engineer Tony Martinez and pilot Sarah Johnson were also taken, along with a handful of other humans who had been too wounded to escape. Dr. Vethanara examined her new specimens with satisfaction, noting their varied biological responses to capture, and stressed Kate Sullivan's last conscious thought before the alien stun weapon overwhelmed her nervous system was of her crewmates who had not survived the battle. The faces of friends and colleagues who had died in the attack flashed through her mind, and she felt a deep rage building within her. The Kethanari had underestimated humanity once. Kate Sullivan woke up in a cell that seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as the Kethanari ships. The walls pulsed with a soft blue light that hurt her eyes, and the air tasted metallic and strange. Her head throbbed from the effects of the alien stun weapon, and it took several minutes for her to remember where she was and how she had gotten there. The holding area was larger than she had expected, with several other human prisoners scattered throughout the space. She could see Tony Martinez sitting against one wall, his engineer's uniform torn and stained with blood from a head wound. Sarah Johnson lay on the floor nearby, still unconscious from her injuries sustained during the battle. Several other crew members she recognized were also present, all of them looking confused and frightened. Dr. Vethanara appeared at the entrance to the holding area, her crystalline form reflecting the blue light in patterns that made Kate's eyes water. The alien scientist carried several instruments that hummed with energy, and her movements had the purposeful efficiency of someone beginning an important experiment. She studied the human prisoners with the same clinical detachment she had shown during the first contact. "You are awake," Dr. Vethanara said, her voice carrying through the air without any visible communication device. "Good, I have many questions about your primitive biology, and your responses will be more valuable if you are conscious." She approached Kate with the confidence of a predator examining helpless prey. Kate forced herself to stand, despite the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. "What do you want from us?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady and professional. She had been trained to handle hostile situations, but nothing had prepared her for being a prisoner of an alien species that viewed humans as laboratory specimens. Dr. Vethanara activated one of her instruments, and Kate felt a strange tingling sensation across her skin. "I want to understand how your species functions under stress. Your behavior during the battle was most interesting, particularly your willingness to sacrifice yourselves for others. This is not logical behavior, and I wish to determine what biological factors drive such inefficient responses." The alien scientist began her examination with Tony Martinez, using her instruments to scan his body and record his vital signs. The engineer tried to resist, but restraining fields held him motionless while Dr. Vethanara collected her data. Kate watched in horror as the alien poked and prodded her friend, treating him like a specimen in a laboratory experiment. "Your skeletal structure is remarkably fragile," Dr. Vethanara observed as she examined Tony's broken ribs. "Yet you continue to function despite significant damage. This suggests that your species has developed pain tolerance mechanisms that allow you to operate beyond your physical limitations." She made notes on a device that responded to her thoughts alone. Sarah Johnson regained consciousness during her examination, screaming when she saw the alien standing over her. Dr. Vethanara seemed fascinated by the human emotional response, recording everything with her instruments. "Fear produces interesting changes in your biological systems," she noted. "Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, and your muscles tense for action. Yet you remain conscious and capable of decision-making." Kate tried to comfort her fellow prisoners, but the restraining fields prevented her from moving more than a few feet. She could only watch as Dr. Vethanara methodically examined each human, treating them like laboratory animals rather than sentient beings. The alien's clinical approach was somehow more terrifying than outright cruelty would have been. "Your turn," Dr. Vithanara said, turning her attention to Kate, the restraining field activated, holding the human medical officer motionless while the alien approached with her instruments. Kate felt the tingling sensation again as the scanning devices examined every inch of her body, recording data that would be used to better understand human weaknesses. Dr. Vithanara seemed particularly interested in Kate's medical knowledge, asking detailed questions about human physiology and treatment methods. "Your understanding of biological systems is primitive, but your practical experience with trauma treatment may have value. Tell me about your training and how you learned to treat injuries." Kate answered the questions as briefly as possible. Unwilling to provide information that might be used against her species, Dr. Vithanara seemed amused by her resistance, noting that defiance was another interesting human trait that differed from Kethanari behavior patterns. Most species became submissive when faced with overwhelming technological superiority. The examination continued for what felt like hours, with Dr. Vithanara testing human responses to various stimuli. She was particularly fascinated by their ability to endure pain while remaining conscious and alert. The alien scientist made extensive notes about human durability, noting that while they were physically weak compared to Kethanari standards, they possessed remarkable endurance and determination. "Remove your upper garments," Dr. Vithanara commanded, her instruments indicating that she wanted to examine Kate's torso for additional data. "I need to study your internal organ arrangement and skeletal structure more thoroughly." The clinical tone made the demand seem like a routine medical procedure rather than a violation of human dignity. Kate hesitated, but the restraining field tightened, making it difficult to breathe. She realized that resistance would only make the situation worse for her and her fellow prisoners. With trembling hands, she removed her uniform shirt, revealing the standard undergarments worn by human military personnel. Dr. Vithanara activated her scanning instruments, preparing to examine Kate's exposo. The alien scientist expected to find the same basic biological structure she had observed in the other human specimens, but what she saw instead made her freeze in shock. Covering Kate's entire back was an intricate tattoo that seemed to shift and move in the blue light of the holding cell. The tattoo was unlike anything Dr. Vithanara had seen during her studies of human body modification. Instead of the crude pigments and simple designs she expected, this marking was incredibly complex, with patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles. The design appeared to be some kind of technical schematic or star map, but the level of detail was far beyond what she had believed humans capable of creating. "What is this marking?" Dr. Vithanara asked, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that had not been present before. She moved closer to examine the tattoo, her instruments scanning the intricate patterns with increasing intensity. The design seemed to respond to her scanning devices, revealing hidden layers of complexity that had not been visible to the naked eye. Kate felt a strange sense of pride, despite her fear. "It's a tattoo," she said simply. "My grandfather designed it for me before he died. He said it would help me remember important things about strategy and warfare." She had never fully understood the complex patterns herself, but she had memorized every line and curve as a way of honoring her grandfather's memory. Dr. Vithanara's instruments began to register readings that made no sense according to her understanding of human technology. The tattoo ink contained microscopic particles that seemed to be arranged in specific patterns, creating a kind of three-dimensional information storage system. The scanning devices revealed that the tattoo was not just decorative but functional, containing data encoded at a molecular level. "This is impossible," Dr. Vithanara muttered, adjusting her instruments to examine the tattoo more closely. "Your species lacks the technology to create such complex molecular structures. The information density in this marking exceeds anything your civilization should be capable of producing." She ran additional scans, hoping to find some explanation for what she was seeing. The alien scientist activated a deep scan mode that used wavelengths of light not visible to human eyes. The tattoo responded by revealing additional layers of information, patterns within patterns that seemed to go on infinitely. Dr. Vithanara's instruments detected quantum markers embedded in the ink, structures that should have been impossible for humans to create or manipulate. Kate watched as the alien's confidence began to crack. Dr. Vithanara had approached the examination with the certainty of a superior being studying primitive creatures, but the tattoo was challenging everything. She thought she knew about human capabilities. The alien scientist's movements became more frantic as she tried to understand what she was seeing. Where did your grandfather obtain the knowledge to create this marking? Dr. Vithanara demanded, her voice carrying a note of desperation that surprised Kate. What technology did he use to encode information at the molecular level? Your species should not possess such capabilities. Kate shook her head, genuinely confused by the alien's reaction. He was just a military historian. He spent his whole life studying battles and tactics from throughout human history. He said the tattoo would help me remember the important lessons if I ever needed them. She had always assumed her grandfather had been speaking metaphorically about remembering lessons. Dr. Vithanara activated her most powerful scanning device, one that was normally used to analyze ancient Kethenary artifacts. The results made her stumble backward in shock. The tattoo was not just a random collection of patterns, but a perfect reproduction of something she recognized. Dr. Vithanara stood frozen in the holding cell, her crystalline form trembling as she stared at the tattoo covering Kate's back. The implications of her discovery were too enormous to fully comprehend. The Codex of Endless War had been the cornerstone of Kethenary military doctrine for thousands of years, and its loss had been mourned as one of the greatest tragedies in their civilization's history. Now she was looking at a perfect reproduction of that sacred document, tattooed onto the back of a human she had dismissed as primitive. You must tell me everything about your grandfather, Dr. Vithanara demanded, her voice carrying a desperation that surprised both herself and her human prisoner. How did he acquire this knowledge? What sources did he use? What other information did he possess? The alien scientist's clinical detachment had completely disappeared, replaced by an urgent need to understand how humans had gained access to Kethenary military secrets. Kate felt a strange mixture of fear and pride as she began to understand the significance of what she carried. Colonel Ben Sullivan was my grandfather, she said slowly. He spent 50 years studying military history from every civilization he could find records of. He believed that understanding how others fought wars would help humanity survive whatever threats we might face in the future. Dr. Vithanara activated her recording devices, capturing every word of Kate's explanation. The alien scientist was beginning to realize that the humans might be far more dangerous than anyone in the Kethenary Empire had suspected. What other civilizations did he study? How many military documents did he analyze? Did he create other markings like this one? The questions came rapidly, and Kate struggled to remember everything her grandfather had told her about his work. He studied thousands of conflicts from throughout human history, but he also collected information about theoretical battles and strategies that had never been used. He said that knowledge was the only weapon that could never be taken away from a warrior. As Kate spoke, Dr. Vithanara began to understand the true scope of what the humans had accomplished. While the Kethenary had become complacent in their technological superiority, humans had been systematically studying and preserving military knowledge from every source they could find. The tattoo was not just a random discovery, but part of a deliberate effort to prepare for future conflicts. The patterns on your back are not just decorative, Dr. Vithanara explained, her voice filled with awe and terror. They contain the complete strategic doctrine of the greatest military mind in Kethenary history. These tactics have been used to conquer hundreds of worlds and defeat countless enemy fleets. Your grandfather somehow decoded information that our own scholars have been unable to recover. Kate felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as she realized what she carried. The tattoo was not just a memorial to her grandfather, but a weapon that could potentially save humanity from extinction. He made me memorize every line and pattern, she said quietly. He told me that someday I might need to remember the lessons it contained. Dr. Vithanara's instruments detected something else that made her crystalline form glow with excitement and fear. The tattoo was not just a static reproduction of the codex, but a functional guide that could be interpreted and applied to real military situations. The quantum markers embedded in the ink would respond to specific thought patterns, revealing tactical applications for different scenarios. "You have memorized the entire codex," Dr. Vithanara whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "You carry in your mind the strategic knowledge that built our empire. This is impossible. No primitive species should be capable of such mental discipline." The alien scientist was struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she believed about human limitations. Kate began to understand that her grandfather had given her more than just a tattoo. He had encoded within her the knowledge needed to fight against any enemy that might threaten humanity. The patterns on her back were a map to victory, and she was the only person who could read that map. "He trained me from childhood to remember complex patterns and sequences," she explained. "He said it was important for a medical officer to have a good memory." The sound of footsteps echoed through the holding area as other Kethanari officers approached. Dr. Vithanara quickly deactivated her scanning devices, realizing that knowledge of her discovery could have dangerous consequences. If the military commanders learned that humans possessed the Codex of Endless War, they might decide that the entire species needed to be eliminated immediately. Admiral Kethvos entered the holding area with several guards, his imposing crystalline form radiating authority and confidence. "Dr. Vithanara, I trust your examination of the human specimens has provided useful data. We are preparing to complete the cleansing of their homeworld, and I wanted to ensure that no valuable research opportunities were lost." Dr. Vithanara struggled to maintain her composure as she faced the military commander. "The specimens are proving more interesting than expected, Admiral. I request additional time to complete my studies before any final disposal decisions are made." She could not reveal the truth about the tattoo without triggering consequences that might destroy both species. Kate watched the exchange between the aliens, sensing the tension in Dr. Vithanara's voice. The alien scientist was clearly struggling with some internal conflict, and Kate began to realize that her discovery had created problems for her captor as well as opportunities for humanity. The tattoo had changed everything. Even for those who had thought themselves superior, Admiral Kethvos studied the human prisoners with the casual interest of someone examining insects. These creatures showed more resistance than expected during the battle. Their willingness to die for others is an interesting phenomenon, though ultimately pointless. "Complete your studies quickly, Doctor. The fleet will move to Earth's surface within the day." After the Admiral departed, Dr. Vithanara turned back to Kate with an expression that was difficult to read. "Your species faces extinction," she said bluntly. "My people will destroy your homeworld and eliminate every human in the galaxy. The Kethanari Empire does not tolerate resistance from primitive species." Her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Kate met the alien's gaze without flinching. "Then why haven't you told your commander about what you found? If this tattoo is so important, why keep it secret?" She had sensed something in Dr. Vithanara's behavior that suggested the alien scientist was having doubts about her people's actions. Dr. Vithanara was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline form reflecting the blue light of the holding cell. "Because I am beginning to understand that your species is not as primitive as we believed. The Codex of Endless War contains strategies that could be used against us. If your military leaders have access to this knowledge, the war might not end as quickly as Admiral Kethvos expects." The admission hung in the air between them, a recognition that the balance of power might not be as one-sided as the Kethanari had assumed. Kate felt a spark of hope for the first time since her capture. "You're afraid," she said simply. "You're afraid that humanity might actually have a chance to fight back?" Dr. Vithanara's instruments detected elevated stress levels in her own biological systems, a reaction she had not experienced in decades. "Fear is not the correct term," she said defensively. I am concerned about the implications of my discovery. If humans possess strategic knowledge equal to our own, the conflict could become far more costly than anticipated. Kate began to understand that she might have leverage in this situation. The alien scientists needed information about human military capabilities, but Kate was the only one who truly understood what the tattoo represented. I could help you understand what my grandfather discovered, she offered. But I would need something in return. The negotiation that followed was unlike anything either species had experienced before. Dr. Vefanara found herself treating a human as an equal for the first time, recognizing that Kate possessed knowledge that could be crucial to the outcome of the war. Kate, meanwhile, began to see an opportunity to save not just her fellow prisoners, but potentially her entire species. I want to send a message to the human fleet, Kate said firmly. If you want to understand how we obtained your military secrets, you need to let me warn my people about what's coming. They deserve a chance to defend themselves with the knowledge my grandfather preserved. Dr. Vithanara considered the request, weighing the potential consequences of her decision. Helping a human prisoner contact their military forces would be considered treason by Cathanari standards. But the discovery of the Codex had changed everything, and she was beginning to realize that the coming battle might not be the easy victory her people expected. The alien scientist activated a communication device, her decision made. You will have one opportunity to contact your fleet, she said. But you must tell me everything about your grandfather's research. I need to understand how many humans possess this knowledge and what other military secrets your species might have discovered. Kate felt a surge of hope as she prepared to send her message. The tattoo that had been dismissed as primitive body modification was about to become the weapon that humanity needed to survive. Her grandfather's lifetime of study was finally going to serve. The message Kate transmitted to Admiral Hayes was brief but shocking. She explained that she had been captured by the Cathanari and that her tattoo contained ancient alien military strategies that could be used against their enemies. The communication reached the human fleet just as they were preparing for what everyone believed would be humanity's final battle, and the information changed everything in an instant. Admiral Hayes stood in the command center of the space station Aurora, staring at the tactical display with new understanding. The patterns Kate had described matched formations the Cathanari had used during their devastating attack on the human fleet. If her grandfather had truly decoded their entire military doctrine, humanity might actually have a chance to fight back against their technologically superior enemies. Captain Danny Foster received the tactical information aboard his rebuilt fighter squadron, studying the alien strategies with the eye of an experienced pilot. The Codex revealed weaknesses in Cathanari formations that no human had noticed before, blind spots in their defensive patterns that could be exploited by smaller, faster ships. For the first time since the war began, he felt hope instead of despair. Dr. Vithanara watched nervously as the human fleet began to reposition itself according to the strategies from the Codex. She had given Kate permission to contact her people, but she was beginning to realize the full consequences of that decision. The humans were not just receiving information about Cathanari tactics, they were actively implementing countermeasures based on their own military innovations. Admiral Kethvos remained confident as his fleet approached Earth, unaware that his enemies now possessed the strategic knowledge that had made the Cathanari Empire dominant for thousands of years. He had planned a simple, overwhelming assault that would crush human resistance within hours, but the ancient tactics he intended to use were no longer secret weapons. Captain Lisa Shun commanded the newly retrofitted cruiser Retribution, leading a formation that seemed chaotic and disorganized to Cathanari observers. But the seemingly random movements were actually implementing tactics from the Codex, using misdirection and feints to mask the true nature of the human battle plan. Her crew worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that this might be their last chance to save their home world. Kate Sullivan remained in the Cathanari holding cell, but her role in the battle was far from over. Through the communication link Dr. Vithanara had provided, she continued to transmit tactical advice to the human fleet. Her memorized knowledge of the Codex allowed her to anticipate alien movements and suggest counters that the Kethaneri would never expect. The battle began with the Kethaneri fleet executing what Admiral Kethvos considered a perfect pincer movement, designed to trap the human forces between two wings of superior ships. The tactic had been used successfully in hundreds of previous conflicts, and he expected the primitive humans to be overwhelmed within minutes. Instead, the human fleet seemed to anticipate every move. Captain Foster led his fighter squadrons in an attack pattern that appeared suicidal to Kethaneri observers. The small human ships dove directly into the alien formation, but instead of being destroyed, they exploited gaps in the defensive grid that had been revealed by the Codex. The fighters struck at power conduits and sensor arrays, causing damage that was far more significant than their weapons should have been capable of inflicting. Dr. Vithanara realized with growing horror that the humans were not just using Kethaneri tactics against them, but improving upon those tactics with their own innovations. The ancient strategies from the Codex were being combined with human military thinking that emphasized adaptability and improvisation. The result was a hybrid approach that was more effective than either style alone. Admiral Hayes coordinated the human response from his command station, using the tactical principles Kate had transmitted to predict Kethaneri movements before they happened. Every time the alien fleet tried to reposition itself, the humans were already moving to counter the maneuver. The technological superiority that had made the Kethaneri seem invincible was being neutralized by superior strategic thinking. Captain Jones' cruiser executed a maneuver that Admiral Kethvos recognized from ancient Kethaneri battle records, but the human implementation was different from anything he had seen before. The ship used the classic rolling attack pattern but combined it with rapid course changes that made it nearly impossible to target. The fusion of old wisdom and new thinking was proving devastatingly effective. The Kethaneri fleet found itself fighting an enemy that seemed to understand their own military doctrine better than they did. Admiral Kethvos watched in disbelief as his carefully planned assault was systematically dismantled by opponents he had dismissed as primitive. The humans were anticipating every tactical decision and responding with countermeasures that exploited weaknesses in formations that had been considered perfect. Kate continued to provide guidance to the human fleet, her knowledge of the Codex allowing her to suggest strategies that took advantage of specific Kethaneri blind spots. She could visualize the entire battle in her mind, seeing patterns that had been drilled into her memory by years of studying her grandfather's tattoo. Every line and curve on her back had meaning, and that meaning was saving human lives. Dr. Vithanara found herself in an impossible position as she watched her own people being outmaneuvered by the species she had considered inferior. The tactical brilliance displayed by the human fleet was undeniable, and she began to understand that the Kethaneri had made a fundamental error in judging their opponents. Intelligence and strategic thinking were not dependent on technological advancement. The turning point came when Captain Foster's fighters managed to disable the command ship's main communication array using a tactic that combined Kethaneri stealth approaches with human innovation. The alien fleet suddenly found itself without central coordination, and the individual ship commanders were unprepared to adapt to the rapidly changing battle conditions. Admiral Kethvos attempted to rally his forces, but the human fleet had gained momentum that seemed unstoppable. Every move the Kethaneri made was anticipated and countered. Every formation was broken by tactics that seemed to come from their own military heritage, but had been refined and improved by human thinking. The battle that was supposed to be a simple extermination had become a humiliating defeat. Kate felt a mixture of pride and sadness as she watched the battle unfold through the communication link. Her grandfather's lifetime of study was finally serving its intended purpose, but the cost in lives on both sides was enormous. She began to wonder if there might be a way to end the conflict without total destruction of either species. Dr. Vithanara approached Kate with an expression that mixed respect and fear. "Your people are defeating our fleet," she said quietly. "How is this possible? We have superior technology, superior numbers, superior everything. Yet your primitive ships are winning against impossible odds." The alien scientist's entire worldview was collapsing as she watched the battle. Kate looked at her captor with compassion rather than anger. You called us primitive because we study war and mark our bodies with military knowledge. But you forgot that intelligence and strategy matter more than technology. My grandfather understood that the greatest weapon is not the strongest gun, but the wisest mind. The Kethaneri fleet began to retreat as their losses mounted beyond anything Admiral Kethvos had thought possible. The humans were not just defeating them, they were doing it using the Kethaneri's own tactical heritage against them. The humiliation was complete, and the implications for the Empire would be devastating. Captain Chun led the human pursuit, but Admiral Hayes ordered her to hold back rather than destroy the fleeing aliens completely. The message was clear: humanity had proven it could defend itself, but it was choosing mercy over vengeance. This restraint impressed Dr. Vithanara more than the military victory had as the battle ended. Kate found herself face to face with Ambassador Zethkala, who had come to the research vessel to understand how the humans had achieved the impossible. The proud alien diplomat who had dismissed humanity as primitive was now forced to acknowledge that she had been wrong about everything. Your species possesses knowledge that we thought was lost forever, Zethkala said, her voice carrying none of the arrogance that had marked their first meeting. How did you preserve our ancient wisdom when we ourselves had forgotten it? What other secrets do your people possess? Kate smiled as she prepared to explain the truth about humanity's greatest strength. We never forget anything important. Every battle, every strategy, every lesson learned in war gets studied, preserved, and passed down to the next generation. While you became comfortable with your technology, we kept learning from everyone we could find, including you. Dr. Vithanara realized that the tattoo was just one example of humanity's approach to knowledge preservation. Across Earth, there were probably thousands of people carrying similar markings, each one containing tactical wisdom from different civilizations and conflicts. The humans had been preparing for interstellar war long before they had encountered their first alien species. The final scene played out aboard the Horizon's Edge, where Kate was finally reunited with Captain Morrison and the surviving